cybernetics is trying to solve. Look, we're all just observers in a world that is packed with systems so incredibly complex, we can never, ever know everything that's going on inside them. So the big question is, how do you manage that? How do you actually control anything in a world that's basically a giant mystery?
The whole approach kicks off with this really powerful metaphor. To deal with all that complexity, you just decide to treat the thing you're studying, doesn't matter if it's a brain, a company, a piece of tech, as a black box.
So this first part is really all about perspective. It's about us accepting our own limits. We can't see all the tiny gears and wires inside every complex thing out there. Nope. We're stuck on the outside, looking in.
So here's the crucial thing to get. The black box isn't a literal physical object. It's really a description of our situation. We can poke it, give it some inputs, and then we watch to see what outputs it spits out. But what happens in between? That's totally hidden from us. And that's pretty much our relationship with almost any complex system you can think of.
Okay, so if you can't see what's going on inside the box, what do? Well, you start drawing a map of its behavior. You build a simplified model based on the only things you can see. And that's the next big step. And this is a really, really key distinction. The system is not the thing out there in the real world. It's our map of that thing. It's our understanding of it, an abstract guide we create so we can try to navigate its complexity. And just like any map, the whole point is to be useful, to help us predict what's going to happen next.
Now, if you've got the simplest kind of map, what Pask calls a state-determined system, making a prediction is totally straightforward. If you know where you are right now and you know the rule for how to move, you can know with 100% certainty where you'll be in the next moment. It's like a path with no forks in the road. The journey is totally locked in. But, of course, the real world is almost never that simple, right? What happens when your map has to deal with pure uncertainty? When being in one spot could lead to a bunch of different possible next spots? Well, this is where it gets really interesting, because now we have to stop thinking in certainties and start thinking in probabilities.
All right, so once we have our map, even if it's a bit fuzzy and based on probabilities, we can finally start thinking about control. How do we influence that black box? How do we get it to do what we want it to do? How do we, grab the steering wheel and point the whole system towards a goal?
Here's the difference, plain and simple. On one side, you have an uncontrolled system. Think of a boat just getting tossed around by the waves. Its path is totally at the mercy of the weather. But on the other side, you have a controlled system. That's a system that's actively steering itself towards a goal, fighting against all the disturbances to stay on a steady course. And the magic trick that makes this possible? It's famously called negative feedback. A signal about what the system is actually doing gets fed back into the controller, which then automatically corrects any error. The classic example Pask gives is James Watt's governor on an old steam engine. If the engine starts going too fast, the governor senses it and cuts back the steam to slow it right back down. It's simple, it's elegant, and it literally changed the world.
And this all brings us right to Norbert Wiener's foundational definition. Cybernetics is the science that digs into these universal principles of control and communication. And it doesn't care if they're happening inside a living creature or inside a machine we built. The underlying principles are exactly the same.
But now for the final boss battle. What happens when the black box isn't just complicated? What if it's actively learning and changing? What do you do when the rules of the game are changing while you're playing it?
This forces us to make a really important distinction. A simple controller, like a thermostat, is what you'd call perfectly informed. It just runs on one fixed, unchanging rule. But a more advanced controller is imperfectly informed. It has no idea what the rules of its environment are. It has to figure them out through trial and error.
So how on earth does it learn? Well, Pask lays out how an imitative controller does it, and it's pretty intuitive. First, it just tries something. Then, it gets feedback, knowledge of results, telling it if that was a good move or a bad move. Then, it updates its own internal map of the world based on that feedback. And then, it just does it again and again and again, getting a tiny bit smarter with every single loop.
And when you get a situation where both the controller and its environment are learning and adapting to each other, well, that's when you get what's called a self-organizing system. It's a system that honestly feels alive because its behavior is always evolving. And for us, as the observers, we can't just draw one map and call it a day. We have to be constantly updating our own understanding just to keep up with the thing.
So as we zoom out, you can start to see how all these ideas, the black box, the system as a map, feedback, learning, they're not just about one specific thing. They come together to form this incredibly powerful, universal toolkit. Pask really saw cybernetics as a general systems theory. What that means is, it's not interested in the specific stuff a system is made of, whether that's brain cells or silicon chips or even people in a company. It's hunting for the abstract rules of organization and control that hold true for all of them.
And just look at how wide this net is cast. You can use this toolkit for industrial management, for building models of the brain, for understanding how biology regulates itself, for building teaching machines that adapt to a student, even for trying to understand social systems. It's the same fundamental toolkit, and it gives you a powerful lens to look at all these different worlds.
And that leaves us with one last really big idea to chew on. Paski's work always reminds us that the system we think we're looking at is actually our own creation. It's just a map, an abstraction of a much messier reality. And that puts a ton of power and responsibility right back on us. Because if the world we deal with is defined by the map we choose to draw, then maybe the most powerful thing we can ever do is change the map.